My son stood at my 65th birthday dinner and told 11 relatives that Wanda's family had spent long enough waiting. He didn't know there was a second envelope in my handbag. My name is Eugenia Corbett. Most people call me Genie. My husband Gilbert and I were married for 38 years. We raised one son, built a heating and cooling supply company out of a leased warehouse on the edge of Kitchener, and learned that building something real takes longer than people expect and looks a great deal less impressive while it is happening. Gilbert handled installations and client relationships. I managed the accounts, negotiated supplier contracts, and dealt with every difficult situation that came across the desk. We hired slowly, paid our people well, and never expanded faster than we could manage. When a national distributor bought the company 12 years ago, we walked away with enough to live carefully and give generously. After taxes, investments, and 2 properties we owned outright, our house in Cambridge and a rental property in Guelph, we were worth just under $4 million. We did not live like people with $4 million. We shopped at the same grocery store we had always used. Gilbert drove the same truck for 9 years because it still ran and he saw no reason to replace a thing that worked. I stayed in the brick house where Malcolm had grown up because the kitchen windows looked out over the backyard. And because leaving a good home simply to prove you could afford something newer seemed like a waste of a life. Malcolm knew the company sale had made us comfortable. He did not know the full amount. Gilbert believed that telling grown children precise numbers changed the way they saw their parents. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. After he died, I understood he had been wise. Gilbert had a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in February, 3 years before my 65th birthday. He was shoveling the front walk, something I had asked him to leave for the service we paid for, and he was gone before the ambulance arrived. In the months after, I moved through the house as though waiting for something to return to normal. I kept his reading glasses on the side table. I left his winter boots by the door longer than was sensible. On Sunday evenings, I sometimes reached for my phone to call him about something ordinary before I remembered. Malcolm was good in those months. He called often and came when I asked him to. He drove me to appointments, fixed the leaking eave screws, and sat with me in the kitchen without needing to fill every silence. I was grateful for him in a way I hadn't thought to say aloud. Then he met Wanda Schreiber. Wanda was polished and energetic, and very good at making you feel you had her complete attention. She remembered details. She sent cards. She called me Genie before the wedding, which happened 11 months after they met. She had a son, Kieran, who was 28 at the time and had recently left a marketing position because he felt the company wasn't suited to his skill set. I gave them generous gifts at the wedding and welcomed them to holiday dinners. I was not close to Kieran, but I was not unkind to him. Malcolm also had a daughter from his first marriage. My granddaughter Rosalind was finishing her 2nd year of nursing school at McMaster University in Hamilton. She and Gilbert had been close in a way that was quiet and specific. He taught her to change a car tire in our driveway the summer she was 16, and she called every Sunday after he died without being asked. Wanda found the closeness between Rosalind and me slightly inconvenient, though she never said that plainly. Instead, she described Rosalind as very capable whenever the topic of money came up. Rosalind has such a good head on her shoulders, she would say. She doesn't need the kind of support Kieran is still building toward. Kieran was 28. Rosalind was working 12-hour clinical placements. For the first 2 years of Malcolm's marriage, I told myself Wanda was simply protective of her son. I translated her comments into something kinder than they were. That was my error. Not that I failed to see what was happening, but that I kept finding softer explanations for it. 6 months before my birthday, Malcolm invited me to dinner at the house where he and Wanda lived. The house belonged to me. I had purchased it through a holding company when they married, and offered them a lease at a symbolic $1 a month. I wanted Malcolm to begin the marriage without being stretched by housing costs. The title remained with my company, and the lease explicitly prohibited the property from being used as security for any loan. Wanda had taken to calling it their uptown house when she spoke to friends, by which she meant the neighborhood near the Waterloo Tech Corridor. I never corrected her in company. That evening, the dining table had folders on it. Wanda poured wine and said the family needed to think about the future. "We are all getting older," she began, looking at me specifically. "Malcolm had concerns," she said, managing so many details. The properties, the investments, the annual tax filings had to be exhausting for someone living alone. I asked Malcolm whether he had seen any indication I was struggling. He looked at the table. "Not struggling exactly, but we want to be prepared." Wanda opened the first folder. Inside was a brochure for a retirement community in Burlington. Private suites, a dining program, a common room with large windows. She described it as though she were doing me a favor. You would have people around you, she said, and we would not have to worry about the house in Cambridge. I asked what would happen to my house in Cambridge. The market is quite strong right now, she said. Who is we? I asked. Her smile stayed, the warmth left it. I told them I was not moving. I drove myself everywhere, managed my own finances, had restained the back deck the previous August, and had no intention of trading my kitchen window for a dining program. Wanda laughed the way people do when they want to call something foolish without using the word. I went home with the brochure in my bag and put it in the recycling the next morning. I thought the conversation had ended. It had only taken a different shape. Over the following weeks, Malcolm began asking careful questions about the estate. Had I updated the will since Gilbert died? Was Rosalind named directly, or would things pass through Malcolm first? Did I still use the same solicitor? I answered in general terms. My affairs were organized, Rosalind was protected. There was nothing to worry about. That last sentence bothered him. Protected how? Appropriately, I said. Malcolm sighed. Mom, I'm your only child, and Kieran and Rosalind are both part of this family now. I told him Kieran was welcome at my table and had been from the beginning. That did not automatically make him an equal beneficiary of what Gilbert and I had spent a working life building. Malcolm didn't argue. He became quiet. Soon afterward, Wanda began including me in more things. Weekend brunches, a charity luncheon at a hotel in Waterloo, dinners with couples I didn't know. At one of these, a man I had never met introduced himself as Kieran's business partner and asked whether I was considering investing in their food truck franchise concept. I said no one had approached me about it. Wanda touched my arm. We are waiting for the right moment, she said. I told her the right moment would not change my answer. Her hand left my arm. 3 days later, Malcolm called to say I had embarrassed her. She was only proud of what Kieran was building. I said I was glad to hear about the project, but I hadn't been asked. I had been introduced without context to a stranger who immediately named a dollar figure. That isn't embarrassing someone. That is being made a target without warning. You always assume the worst about her. I didn't argue. I apologized for speaking sharply. Keeping Malcolm close mattered more to me than being right about a dinner I had already left. That apology was a mistake. It taught Wanda that if she pressed far enough and Malcolm became uncomfortable, I would step back to protect the relationship. Her next request was larger. She wanted $180,000 for Kieran's franchise. Investors were already circling, she said. The window was narrow. I asked for a business plan and financial projections. She provided 16 pages of images, photographs of branded trucks, quotes about entrepreneurship, a vague description of the concept. There were no audited figures, no operating costs, no evidence of the investors she mentioned. I declined. Malcolm was furious. You and Dad invested in strangers for years when you were running the business. But when your own family asks, suddenly you need proof of everything. Strangers who received our investment provided financial statements and signed agreements, I said. So you don't trust us. I looked at my son across the same kitchen table where he had once done his homework. Trust isn't a substitute for information, I said. He left before finishing his coffee. For the following month, he called twice. I missed him more than I let on. Rosalind came to visit one Sunday in October and found me sorting through a box of photographs from the company's early years. We found one of Gilbert and Malcolm standing in front of the first van. Malcolm was perhaps 8 years old, squinting into the sun, holding a small wrench Gilbert had let him carry. Dad was so happy in that one, Rosalind said. I told her people got more complicated as they got older. She looked at me for a moment. Grandma, giving someone what they demand doesn't make them easier to be around. It just makes the next demand arrive sooner. I asked whether Malcolm had spoken to her about money. She hesitated. Then she told me. He had called her 6 weeks earlier and asked her to sign a document. It stated that she had already received meaningful financial support from Gilbert and me over the years. Her education fund, travel, help with her car, and that she had no expectation of further inheritance. Did you sign it? I asked. No. I told him that was your decision to make, not his. She said Malcolm had been angry. He reminded her that Kieran lived nearby and could help look in on me as I got older. Kieran had not called me in 8 months. Rosalind looked ashamed. I should have told you sooner. You're telling me now, I said. That conversation changed what I understood about the problem. Malcolm wasn't simply reacting to Wanda's pressure. He was constructing a story in which Rosalind had already received her share, and anyone who questioned the arrangement was being selfish. The next morning, I called Mr. Patel. Mr. Patel had handled our legal affairs since the company sale. I asked him to review every property record connected to my holding company, particularly the Waterloo house where Malcolm and Wanda lived. I also asked the bank to flag any inquiry involving my name or my properties. The first answer came back 4 days later. A lender had contacted the title office to verify ownership of the Guelph rental property. The inquiry was connected to a home equity line of credit application. The applicants had listed the Guelph property as an asset expected to transfer within 18 months as part of an estate arrangement. The application was in Malcolm's name. Supporting it was a letter, signed by Malcolm, stating that I had verbally agreed to include the property in his inheritance on an accelerated timeline. I had agreed to no such thing. The application had been declined because ownership could not be verified. Mr. Patel advised sending a formal notice immediately. I asked him to wait 48 hours while he completed the full review. The second answer was worse. As part of verifying the unauthorized claim against my property, the lender had shared correspondence they had received from Malcolm and Wanda. In one email, Wanda had written to Malcolm that once the line of credit was approved, they could use the capital to back Kieran's expansion and begin the conversation about getting me into something more manageable than the Cambridge house. In another, Malcolm had written that Rosalind would resist but could be described as someone who had already received more than her share. Wanda's reply read, "Once Genie signs the new power of attorney, Rosalind won't have a leg to stand on. We just need the evening to feel like the right moment." My birthday was 4 weeks away. I read that line several times. We just need the evening to feel like the right moment. They had already planned the mood, the speech, the emotional conditions in which I would be expected to prove my love by signing something. I had expected to feel angry when something like this happened. What I felt was grief. The son who had sat beside me in the kitchen in the months after Gilbert died was still somewhere inside the man who had written those words. But kindness, shown in the past, cannot excuse dishonesty in the present, and I was finished translating what I was looking at into something easier to bear. I cried that night. In the morning, I stopped waiting. Mr. Patel and I revised the estate plan over 2 appointments. Rosalind would receive a protected trust and the Cambridge house. A substantial portion of the remaining assets would fund a scholarship program for women re-entering the skilled trades after raising families. Something Gilbert and I had talked about for years without formalizing. Malcolm would receive a modest annual amount from a separate trust, structured so it could not be borrowed against or redirected. Wanda and Kieran were not included. The Waterloo house lease would be reviewed immediately. I could have ended the lease that week. Instead, I invited Malcolm to lunch. I needed to know whether any honest part of what remained between us could still be found. He arrived 20 minutes late and spent the first several minutes answering messages on his phone. I asked whether he had been involved in Wanda's financing plans. He set the phone face down on the table. "We've discussed it." "Have you applied for credit using my property?" "Nothing formal." "Have you used my estate in any application to a lender?" He laughed quietly. "Mom, you sound like you're conducting an interview." I waited. He said no. That was his last chance. I asked about the birthday plans. He relaxed. "Wanda had arranged a private dining room at Langdon Hall," he said. "Close family only." He wanted the evening to feel like they were all one family now. "Will Rosalind be there?" I asked. He looked irritated. "If she can make it." Rosalind had not been invited. I called her from the car park after lunch and asked her to come. Then I called Langdon Hall and paid for the entire dinner myself. If a public truth was going to be told that night, I would not allow Malcolm to claim he had provided the room. The week before my birthday, Wanda sent a cashmere wrap in a pale box with a card that said she hoped we could begin a new chapter. She offered to arrange a driver for me on the evening. I thanked her and drove myself. Rosalind came to my house that afternoon. She was wearing the small pearl earrings I had given her the Christmas after Gilbert died. "Are you sure you want me there?" she asked. "You are my family," I said. "You don't need to earn a chair at the table." Before we left, I put 2 envelopes into my handbag. The first was empty. The second held everything that mattered. The private dining room at Langdon Hall was set with white candles and fresh flowers. 11 relatives stood when I walked in. Wanda kissed both my cheeks and welcomed everyone warmly. Her expression shifted the moment she saw Rosalind behind me. "What a lovely surprise," she said. "Grandma asked me to come," Rosalind said simply. Malcolm found us from across the room. He hugged Rosalind stiffly and asked why she hadn't mentioned it. I touched Rosalind's arm. There would be time for the rest. Dinner was peaceful for a while. People shared stories about Gilbert and the early years of the business. One of my cousins recalled the winter Gilbert drove a supply van through a blizzard on the 401 to get a part to a hospital in London before their heating system failed. Everyone laughed. I allowed myself to enjoy the evening. Then the dessert plates were cleared. Malcolm stood with a glass in his hand. He spoke about strength and family. He called me the foundation of everything they came from. He said the greatest gift he could give me was knowing the next generation would be provided for. Wanda watched him with shining eyes. He talked about families growing and changing, about old arrangements needing to grow alongside them. Wanda walked to my chair and placed a cream-colored envelope beside my plate. I opened it. Inside was a document titled Corbett Family Estate Direction. It proposed transferring the Guelph rental property and $850,000 into a new family trust. Malcolm was named primary beneficiary. Wanda was named co-trustee. Kieran was listed alongside Rosalind as an equal beneficiary. Rosalind leaned close enough to read. Her face went still. I asked who had prepared the document. Wanda said a financial planner had helped them draft something fair. A plan for my estate. A direction for the family, she said. Malcolm set down his glass. Mom, Rosalind has had years of support from you and Dad. Kieran has never had that opportunity. My new family deserves to be part of what you built. Several people looked at their plates. One of my cousins said Malcolm's name under her breath. Rosalind spoke quietly. The education fund Grandpa set up was before you ever met Wanda. You're using that to take my place. No one is taking your place. You're still included. As one of two, when I'm the only grandchild. Wanda stepped in. Family isn't only determined by biology. Neither is it created by documents signed in secret, I said. Wanda softened her voice. Genie, this isn't about taking anything away from you. You keep full use of everything during your lifetime. We're only trying to prevent conflict after you're gone. I looked around the table. Does anyone here believe that genuine peace is usually presented as a surprise document at someone's birthday dinner? No one answered. Malcolm's face reddened. We knew you'd react this way. Then why invite witnesses? He said the family deserved transparency. I agreed with him on that point. I reached into my handbag and placed the first envelope I had brought beside the one Wanda had left at my plate. This is my response to your proposal, I said. Malcolm opened it. He looked up at me. There's nothing here. Exactly, I said. That is what you are entitled to decide about my estate. A few people shifted in their chairs. Wanda's expression hardened. This is childish. No, what comes next is serious. I removed the second envelope and placed it in front of Rosalind, not Malcolm. Please open it and read the first letter aloud. Her hands were not quite steady as she broke the seal. She unfolded the page, the lender's formal written notification of the declined application, and began to read. The room changed when she reached Malcolm's name. The silence became something different from polite. Malcolm leaned across the table. That was only a preliminary inquiry. I asked Rosalind to read the next page. It was Malcolm's signed letter to the lender, stating I had verbally committed to transferring the Guelph property. Wanda interrupted. We were told that a letter of intent was a standard part of the process. It is not your property, I said. It has never been your property. One of my cousins looked at Malcolm. I always thought you and Wanda owned that place in Waterloo. Malcolm said nothing. I own it, I said. I purchased it when Malcolm remarried and offered them a lease at $1 a month so they could begin the marriage without financial pressure. The title has always remained with my company. The lease explicitly prohibits the property from being used in any financing application. The truth landed harder than any figure printed in their proposed trust. For 2 years, Wanda had hosted dinner parties in that house, renovated the kitchen, and spoken of the property as though it proved something about who she was. Now everyone at the table understood that everything she had built around it rested entirely on my goodwill. Rosalind read Wanda's email. She read Malcolm's line about framing her as already provided for. She read the plan to use the birthday dinner as the moment when conditions would feel right enough to ask. Nobody looked at the flowers anymore. Malcolm's voice went low. You had no right to those emails. They were submitted to a lender as part of an application involving my property, I said. The lender forwarded them to my company when attempting to verify the claim. Mr. Patel, who had attended at my invitation and had sat quietly until now, confirmed the single relevant point from his end of the table. Mrs. Corbett is the registered owner. She did not authorize the property transfer or the letter representing her agreement. He said nothing further. He did not need to. Malcolm looked around the room the way a person does when they realize no one is coming to pull them out. We were trying to do something for the whole family, he said. Rosalind placed the pages flat on the table. You tried to borrow against a house you don't own. Arrange for my grandmother to leave her home, and remove me from what my grandfather built. Wanda told her not to be dramatic. I turned to face Wanda. You described my removal from my own home as a step in a financing plan. Do not lecture anyone at this table about drama. The color left her face. What followed was bargaining. She said the emails were exploratory. She said families discuss possibilities all the time. She blamed the lender for misunderstanding the intent of the application. She blamed Malcolm for the wording of the letter. Finally, she said that I had always favored Rosalind so openly that her own family had been left with no choice but to protect itself. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I took the last document from the second envelope, the formal termination notice for the Waterloo lease, citing the unauthorized use of the property in a financing application. I handed it to Malcolm. You have 90 days to vacate. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Wanda found her voice first. You're putting your own son out on the street. Malcolm earns a salary. So do you. You have 90 days to find housing that suits your income. She looked at Mr. Patel. Can she actually do this? The lease terms are clear, he said. That was the first consequence. The $180,000 for Kieran's franchise would not be coming. Not as a gift, not as a loan, not in any form that involved my name or my assets. If the concept had merit, it would need to find that proof without me. The third consequence was the estate. I did not recite every figure. I told the table simply that the plan had been revised with an independent trustee before that evening. Malcolm could not co-manage it, could not borrow against it, and could not redirect it. Wanda and Kieran were not beneficiaries. Malcolm stared at me. You changed everything before giving me a chance to explain? I gave you a chance at lunch. You lied to me. His anger collapsed into something smaller. Mom, please. It was the first time that evening he sounded like my son, rather than a man working through a transaction. I did not harden myself against it. I simply stopped letting it govern what I knew. Your relationship with me is not decided tonight, I told him. Your access to my assets is. Wanda stood and gathered her things. If we leave now, don't expect us to come back. I looked at Malcolm. He didn't meet my eyes. That is your decision, I said. They left together. No one followed them. After a moment, my cousin asked whether I wanted to go home early. I considered it. Then I looked at the candles, the flowers, and the people who had just watched something true come into the open. I'm 65 only once, I said. We stayed. Rosalind gave a short toast. She didn't mention money. She talked about Gilbert teaching her to read a set of installation plans in the warehouse when she was 12, and about the time I negotiated a supply contract worth 3 times our previous record, while a pot of soup was on the break room stove behind me. She said that her grandmother had taught her in small and steady ways that being quiet was not the same thing as being without power. Tonight, she said, she taught me that again. I cried then. Not because the evening had been ruined, but because it hadn't. Malcolm didn't call for 11 days. Wanda contacted Mr. Patel twice, arguing the lease termination was retaliatory. He sent her a copy of the specific clause they had violated. After that, her calls stopped. On the 12th day, Malcolm came to the house alone. He sat in the living room without looking around for things to assess. He said Wanda believed I had always planned to humiliate her. He said the application had been filed before he had thought it all the way through. He said Kieran's concept had real potential and only needed the right backing. I waited until he had finished speaking about everyone except himself. Why did you sign the letter? I asked. He looked at the floor. I thought you'd come around on the property eventually. Why did you tell the lender I had already agreed? We needed the application to move forward. Why did you tell me there was no formal application? His eyes filled. I was afraid you'd say no. I had already said no. He nodded slowly. Yes. There was the truth. Not a misunderstanding, not confusion. He believed my answer could be worked around if he acted quickly enough. He apologized. He said he had felt torn between holding his marriage together and being honest with me. You were not torn when you signed the letter, I said. That was a choice. Can you forgive me? Perhaps one day. That won't mean restoring the lease or changing the estate. He said Wanda would see that as punishment. Wanda can describe consequences however she likes. He began coming by every few weeks. For a long time, every visit circled back to the house. Could the deadline be extended? Could he pay market rent? Could I consider the effect on his credit given other debts I hadn't known about? My answer stayed the same. The lease had been a gift. Using the property in a false application had ended it. When he finally stopped asking, Our conversations became shorter and more honest. He and Wanda moved into a townhouse rental in Cambridge. Newer construction, smaller, no space for the dinner parties Wanda had been known for. Kieran's franchise concept did not move forward. Without outside capital to anchor it, the interested parties withdrew, and he found a management position at a logistics company 6 months later. That was not tragedy. It was adulthood. 2 weeks before the move-out, Wanda organized what she called a family conversation at the Waterloo house. My sister attended and called me afterward. Wanda had told the assembled relatives that I was forcing my son out because I had never accepted his marriage. She described the loan document as an administrative misunderstanding. She said the birthday dinner had been a genuine effort to bring everyone together fairly. This time, the relatives did not accept the softer version. One of them asked why a genuine effort required a signed letter misrepresenting the owner's consent. Another asked why Rosalind hadn't been invited to a dinner where her inheritance was being rearranged. Wanda ended the meeting before the questions stopped. I did not celebrate her embarrassment. I simply noticed that I was no longer the only person expected to protect her from the facts. On moving day, I came by with the property manager. The house was nearly empty. Wanda stood in the hallway directing movers while Malcolm went through each room. In the small office off the kitchen, I found Gilbert's old wooden drafting table, the one he had used to sketch installation plans in the early years of the business, the surface worn smooth in the middle from 40 years of use. I had lent it to Malcolm when they moved in. Wanda had once said it was too heavy for the room. It had stayed because it was useful. A packing label had been taped to one corner. I removed the label. This one comes with me. Wanda appeared in the doorway. Malcolm has used it for years. Use doesn't become ownership through time, I said. The sentence applied to more than a table. Malcolm came in from the hall. He looked at the table and then at me. Mom's right, he said. Leave it. Wanda walked away without answering. The property manager arranged delivery. I put the table under the window in the study and cleaned the surface myself. Finding it there each morning settled something I hadn't realized was unsettled. The properties, the trust, even that table. All of it had been treated as things in the process of becoming Malcolm's. Taking back one familiar object made the larger truth visible. Nothing I owned was an inheritance while I was still alive. After the tenancy ended, the property management company made the necessary repairs and we rented the Waterloo house at market rate to a family with no connection to me. Their payments went directly into the scholarship foundation. For the first time, that property was generating income for a purpose Gilbert and I had actually chosen together. That autumn, I formalized the scholarship program. Bursaries for women re-entering the skilled trades after time away from the workforce. Welding, HVAC, electrical plumbing. Trades that Gilbert had spent his career around. Mr. Patel helped establish the trust structure. The first cohort of 4 recipients was announced in March. In May, I did something Gilbert and I had talked about for 15 years and never done. I drove the Cabot Trail by myself, staying in small inns along the coast of Cape Breton and spending a full afternoon in the fishing village where his grandmother had been born. I ate chowder at a counter facing the water. I did not ask anyone's permission. I did not consider whether the money should be preserved instead. The following September, the surplus from the Waterloo property covered the first full year of all 4 scholarship recipients. The afternoon I signed off on the disbursements, I sat with a cup of tea at Gilbert's drafting table and felt his absence and his presence at the same time, which I have come to understand is what memory is for. Malcolm attended the scholarship reception in November. He came alone and stood near the back until the room had mostly cleared, then walked over and told me that his father would have been proud of what I had built here. Yes, I said, he would have. Malcolm had started seeing a counselor. He said that after Gilbert died, he had begun confusing the estate with his own security, as though a guaranteed inheritance were the only protection against every future mistake. Wanda's plans had appealed to him because they converted his anxiety into a timetable. He was not asking me to excuse any of it. That mattered more to me than tears. Slowly, I let him back into more of my life. We had breakfast together once a month. He helped set up tables at the second scholarship reception. When I had a minor procedure in the winter, he drove me home and left once I was settled, without asking what anything had cost or looking at my files. Wanda and I remained distant. She sent a Christmas card. I sent one back. She never acknowledged what had been planned or what it had cost Rosalind and me. Without that, there could be courtesy but not closeness. I accepted it. Peace does not always mean restoring every relationship to its former shape. Sometimes peace is knowing clearly which doors may open again and which ones require a lock. On my 66th birthday, Rosalind made dinner at my house. Malcolm brought dessert. My sister set a photograph of Gilbert near the flowers on the table. After the meal, Malcolm handed me a small envelope. I looked at him. He smiled quietly. This one's different. Inside was a handwritten letter, 2 pages. He named what he had done, not Wanda's influence, not his anxiety, not the circumstances, what he had chosen, what it had cost, what he was trying to change. He wrote that he would understand if nothing about the estate ever changed, and that he wasn't writing to ask for anything. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. "Thank you," I said. I did not promise more than that, and he did not ask for more. The first year had taught me that love without limits becomes permission. The year that followed taught me that limits do not destroy the love worth keeping. They reveal whether it is capable of becoming honest. My money stayed where I put it. My house remained mine. Rosalind no longer had to defend her place in a family she had always been part of, and I stopped measuring myself by how much I was willing to quietly absorb. At 65, I did not lose my son. I lost the pretense that keeping everyone comfortable was the same as holding us together. What remained was smaller and truer and finally real. An inheritance is a gift. It is not a debt that children may collect while the person who built it is still living. And the families that last are the ones where love stands on its own. Where even slow, painful forgiveness is allowed to grow without being asked to do the work that honesty should have done first. If Genie's story gave you something to think about, subscribe and stay with us at Dark Turns for more stories about the turns that change everything.